Good morning, everybody. Hey, my name's Steve Jonas, K4SDJ. I'm your net control. Each Sunday we have the net and also the public health net on Thursdays. I've been working with the hospitals now for about 21 years, and it has changed dramatically. When we originally started, the only thing we had was radios in the RCHs. And we have expanded it from there. Region J has radios now in all of the hospitals. And our goal in life would be to have all of the hospitals with radios in them for better emergency communication.
All right, guys. Well, hey, my name is Brett Smith. I am what is my title? Assistant Section Emergency Coordinator for Hospitals in Department of Public Health. And it's a little longer, not titled than that, but that's really what's important. And Steve is actually, believe it or not, he's my boss. He's now a deputy SEC. So we kind of argue back and forth as who has the greater clout. But I will be the presenter this morning. Steve, my sidekick, will be interjecting from time to time. But hey, folks, I'm glad you're here. And I'll be honest with you, it sure beats having a 3.5-hour drive for me to get down to Forsyth. The only negative is we don't get to sit down and shake hands and drink a cup of coffee together and shoot the breeze. But this is as close as we can get to conducting these trainings. What we're talking today, what we're going to be covering today is we call this kind of our introductory basic course for hospital operations in facilities. This is going to be based off of our emergency operations plan. I mentioned earlier that if you do not have a current version of this, it is available for download on the Georgia ARES website under hospitals. Please go out and get a current version of this because we do change and make edits from time to time. We'll be talking about some of that today. Also, for some of you, it might be easier just to have a hard copy that you can kind of follow along as we go through our presentation. So we encourage every operator to go through this training. Our plan is to define this training as the basic training guide for all hospital operations, because as you see as we go through this process, it gives us an overview of what would a true deployment look like, a true activation, and how we operate, who we report to, etc. And I want to start off this morning by saying that when we think about how does the hospital operations as an ARES operator, how do we fit into this whole organization with GEMA, and then you've got your hospital, your individual hospitals, and the EOC. And we're going to show you right here that when we are deployed, when we look at our chain of command, so to speak, when we are deployed by the hospital emergency manager or the CEO of the hospital, whoever the incident command is. That's who we report to. And when you think of that in terms of chain of command, other than the hospital emergency manager, we report to our state section manager. Right now, that's David Benoist. Under David would be Frank Dean, our section emergency coordinator. Under that would be me. Basically, the idea is understanding who do we listen to as far as hierarchy of command. Under that, under me would be Steve, who is the hospital net manager. Under that would be your local county emergency coordinator in your county. And then the last, of course, is each operator. All right, we think of our roles and responsibilities. We serve the facility that was called. That's a great example of a reminder to encourage most of you, if you have your cell phones there, to go ahead and put them on mute. Okay. When you are called out, you are not required to respond. You have to recognize your training and your capability. If you're asked to do something that you're not qualified to do, recognize that and operate accordingly. But when we are called out, we are managed by the hospital authority. When activated, you are under the direction of that hospital incident command. You're expected to follow all the rules and procedures as dictated by incident command and act appropriately at all times. Once you step foot on that hospital property, you are no longer under the authority of ARES leadership. We are part of a functional unit at that facility under their incident command, and we do not operate independently from that. So for a lot of operators, that's kind of a new concept. They're not familiar with that idea. But when you activate under an incident command, you report to that incident command. And it may not be ARES. You're going to be viewed as a person who has an objective role in supporting that facility during that incident. The whole concept of this is to avoid any ambiguity, so that there's no confusion over who's in charge. You're under that incident command. The only catch here, this is the part that everyone has to remember. As an amateur, as a licensed amateur operator, you are expected to abide by and follow all Part 97 rules and regulations. You are not allowed to violate or break those rules to make an assumption that, well, we're under an emergency order, therefore Part 97 rules no longer apply. That's not true. So unless you are advised otherwise, always follow Part 97 rules of operations. All right. Again, this is what we consider one of our primary training tools. All operators are expected to have basic levels of training. Now, many of you have already been working on completing your ARES task books and completing and meeting the requirements of level 1 and level 2. The hospital operations have had this guideline for about 4 years now, long before ARES came out with a task book. So it's kind of interesting that they are very close in alignment. We have our level 1 and level 2 operations requirements. So does the ARES task book. And what you will find is that our requirements and our expectations may vary slightly from that task book. But all in all, it's basically very similar. To be a level 1 operator, you have to be in good standing. You have to have an active, unrestricted amateur radio license. You have to have a willingness to deploy when needed. We expect all operators to have completed some basic training levels, including either or the Gwinnett County Emergency Operations or Emergency Communications Training Program, which is available through the Georgia ARES website, or preferably the ARRL Emergency Communications Course, otherwise known as EC001. Good basic training course. We also like, and this is something that is not an active point right now, but we are part of GHA 911. We do coordinate directly with the Georgia Hospital Association as well as the Department of Public Health. And we want our operators to at least be active in that. We have access to a program called WebEOC. Unfortunately, that has gone dormant for us temporarily, we hope, because as of right now, we do not have statewide access through WebEOC. You only have access regionally. So in your one region. So we're not going to really push that right now. We hope that that will be corrected in the future and we will be again given statewide access. But for now, we're going to kind of ignore the WebEOC requirements of that. But we do expect every operator to be registered under Everbridge. And Steve Jonas has been taking care of that for most of you. If you do not know whether you are part of the Everbridge system, or if you're not familiar with the Everbridge system, Everbridge is a statewide notification system. Many of your hospitals will utilize either Everbridge or a system similar to that to activate their operators or people in the hospital in the event of a disaster or emergency. We utilize Everbridge in the Aries operation. So if there is a circumstance where operators need to be prepared to deploy, we activate that alert system. You get an email, you'll get phone calls, you get text messages. It is a very, very robust system. So if you are not registered under Everbridge, please send a note to Steve Jonas. Let him know that you need to get set up on it. Okay, other things. We expect all operators to take advantage of training sessions when they're offered. We normally do our primary training every year at the state convention or the state conference down in Forsyth. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we did not have that training left this year or last year. So Steve and I have decided we're going to utilize Zoom as our means of continuing our training for our operators. Just a note, most of you realize that we've not had HIPAA recurrent training. For many of you, it's been 3 years or longer since we've had a recurring HIPAA training. That is the next training session that Steve and I will be putting together in the coming months. So we will be putting something together for everyone to meet that requirement. All right, some of this stuff you can read along. You see that it's basically the same information that you're pretty much aware of. A level 2 operator is basically you've met all the requirements of level 1. Level 2 is you have a general class license or higher, and that you seek and secure your either the Georgia Aries or your GEMA Opticom badge. That is our primary access into facilities when you go into them to identify who you are. If you do not have a Georgia Aries badge, that is something you can go to the Georgia Aries website, read the requirements, and seek to get that completed. In addition to this, almost every facility that you support is going to have a hospital badge that they may require for admission into the facility. If you are not aware of this, check with someone that works with your hospital, whoever is in charge of your hospital operations team, or your emergency manager at your hospital, and see what you need to do, or if it's something they require. Smaller hospitals may not be a big deal. Larger hospitals, guarantee you they will require you to have a badge to get into the facility. But we also expect you to demonstrate the skills to operate all the equipment at your facility. For many of you, it may be different radios that you have at home. They may be equipment that you're not familiar with. We encourage every operator to become very familiar with your operational equipment. The setup, how it's set up, how it's hooked up, how it works, how do you change from one mode to the other, how do you change frequencies. And that's just a great opportunity to stay and get familiar with your equipment. And of course, finally, we expect all operators to participate in all continuing education operation training programs that we offer. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second and make a comment to Steve. Steve, I can't present this and have the chat screen up on my screen simultaneously simply because it blocks my view.
Yep.
If you will keep an eye on that and interrupt me if you see anything that comes up, any questions.
We'll do it.
All right, very good. Okay, guys, we're going to talk about activations. What do we do in an active activation? What will that look like? So bottom line is we expect, for those of you, if you watch the news and you hear information going on, for example, right now, most of you are aware, we have a hospital, a hurricane. Hurricane Fred is
Tropical storm.
Tropical Storm Fred is actually barreling its way towards the forward coast as we speak. And we expect all operators to kind of be aware of what's going on. Be recognizing, oh, this thing looks like it's going to be coming up into Georgia, which it will. Look at it. Is the cone of prediction looking like it will affect your area? If it is, it's usually a good time to be in touch with your local hospital emergency manager. Let them know that you're watching it, as a reminder to them that you are available, that you are prepared, and you're ready to activate should the need arise. However, under no circumstances will you ever self-deploy. You don't show up at the hospital and say, hey, I'm here. You have to be activated by the hospital first. And like I mentioned earlier, notification will be through the Everbridge notification system or by any other means established by that local hospital. If you don't know how your hospital would activate, it's a good time to find that out. If you're new to your facility, if you're new to your hospital team, ask your other team members. How are we notified? How would we be activated? How would the hospital get a hold of us to let us know where we need to deploy? So be aware of how your local hospital operates and what their operations plan is. Many of the hospitals have their own emergency operations plan. If you do not know that plan, if you do not have a copy of that plan, this is a document that you need to have. And it needs to be in your hospital notebook, in the plan, in the book that you keep at your facility. Good to know. You need to be aware of how the hospital operates, what their chain of command is, etc. Okay, like we said, if it's a statewide activation, it would be coming through us. Steve and I would put together the notification and we would send it out to everyone. More than likely, we're going to tell you, don't respond to us. You communicate with your hospital, but do not activate until asked to activate. In the meantime, we want every operator to be aware of the standard Georgia ARES emergency communications frequencies. Primary communications will be done through HF. Usually this will be in the form of a net operating on 3975. That's the primary frequency. During the day, 3975 may not be workable, so it may move to 7287.5. Everyone should know these two primary frequencies. These are the Georgia ARES frequencies, not to be confused with our Georgia hospital operations frequency. Because in a statewide activation, you would be expected to stay communicating on the Georgia ARES. If we have the need arise, we may call a separate net on our primary frequency. But before you jump from that frequency, you would need to activate and let the net control for the Georgia ARES primary frequency know that you are leaving that frequency and moving over to the Georgia hospital frequency. This is something that we want to make sure everyone understands so that there's no ambiguity, no question. we always primary listen to the Georgia Aries primary frequency. Also, in addition to the HF, or you may not have an HF rig, either at home or in your hospital, they would also be conducting communications through DSTAR. And 99.9% of the time, this has been on reflector 030 Bravo. However, there may be a circumstance where 30 Bravo is taken over by GEMA. And if GEMA says, we're taking this frequency over, do not communicate on it until this emergency is over. In that case, we would be moved over to 004 Alpha. This is why it's important that you have the ability to switch reflectors. If you have a hotspot, know how to do this, how to change from 30 Bravo to 4 Alpha. If you're working off of a local county repeater, make sure you know how to unlink and relink from to different reflectors. Be aware of that, know how to do that. Also, monitor your local repeater in your county. You may be setting up a local net in your local county for depending on the circumstances that are going on. So again, all these frequencies are available in Appendix C in this document that we're covering here. All right. So for continuing in this discussion of a local activation and assuming that you are called to deploy. Once you are activated, you will report to your hospital emergency manager or their designee. You will remain in contact with that emergency manager and report to your area of operation. That's going to usually be wherever your radio equipment is contained. The hospital emergency manager will relay information from their incident command center. Now, in the event of an extended deployment over 12 hours, then you will coordinate, and your team at your hospital must coordinate with each other as to how are you going to define shifts, duty shifts. Most, and I say this because it's hard to say most or to give any generalization on what an emergency deployment would look like, but I will tell you that most of the deployments that we have seen have lasted over 24 hours, particularly if it's like a major hurricane coming through the state. Be aware of that. If that is, you need to have your team defined as to who would be the primary ones to deploy initially, who would work the first shift, and then what are your shift lengths going to be. For some of you, you may just say, look, 12-hour shifts a little bit long. We'd like to do 6-hour shifts, or maybe you decide you want to do 4-hour shifts. I don't know how many team members you have on your hospital team. Obviously, the more team members you have, the more shifts you're able to maintain. Although I would suggest, and Steve and I recommend, that a minimum of 2 people be deployed at each shift. Why 2? Simply because, number one, sometimes it's sit and wait. Hours and hours of sitting and waiting with nothing to do. But there are other times when you may be very busy. You're trying to monitor a net. You're trying to receive information. You've got people from the hospital coming in with information they're trying to get sent. They ask you to send documents or information or communicate with another facility. And I will tell you, there are times it can get very, very challenging. And a lot of people can get very frustrated very quickly. And then in the midst of all this, remember, Murphy's Law is always in effect. That's the time when you're going to have radios that won't work. You're going to have cables that short out. You're going to have somebody walks in, they accidentally jerk a connector off of an end of a coax. This stuff happens. This is when it hits the fan. That's why it's sometimes good to have more than one person there that can say, okay, you focus on just monitoring the frequencies. I will handle the other stuff. We'll take care of all this. Also, it's nice to have someone there who can just simply log information for you, because as you've got information coming in, and you're sending documents out or talking to people on the radio, you need to be logging all this information on like your IC 309. All communications need to be logged. You've got to be documenting events as they occur in real time. So remember, it can be very quiet or it can be very chaotic. So be aware of that. It can be a challenging period of time, but more than likely, it's going to come in spits and spats. You know, feast and famine. It's going to be crazy for a few minutes, then it'll be calm again. So realize that it's not going to be high stress the whole time you're there. Just be aware of that. Okay. The hospital team should be activated normally the same time that the hospital staff is activated, because we want you to be able to be a part of all briefings from the hospital at the times they're given. So more than likely, if they are aware of a circumstance that's coming in, you want that hospital to contact you and have you aware, and so that you are activated at the same time as all other hospital staff. Okay? All right. This brings us up to another point. For many of you, you may not have access to your facilities 24 hours at a 24-hour basis. The problem with this is you have to be dependent upon finding a person at your facility to give you access to your equipment. This is something that you need to have worked out so that you can get access 24 hours a day if necessary. In an activation, you should have access to the cafeteria. So the idea is you're not having to bring your own food sources or drink. We would expect the hospital to provide those services to you in an active deployment. And again, these are issues that you would need to make sure that you have an understanding with the emergency managers or facility managers at your hospital. That's why those relationships are very, very important. And realize hospital emergency managers change. People leave. They take new jobs. They hire new emergency managers. But something to keep in mind too is there's rarely a hospital that's going to have someone designated as a hospital emergency manager where that is their sole task. No. This is usually going to be somebody who wears 5 or 6 different hats. They may be the head nurse or the emergency room director. They may have other roles. They may be a facility manager. They just may be a nurse at the hospital that they designated as their emergency manager. Be aware, these people have multiple responsibilities in the hospital, so they may not have all the answers. It's important to focus on developing a relationship with that person. As these people come on, they may not know you. You need to change that now, long before we're ever called to activate for an emergency. You need to have a relationship with these people, and you need to nurture that. They need to see your face on a regular basis, which means if you're only showing up at the hospital on the first Sunday of the month, they're not on duty at that time. So you need to plan and set up times at least 2 or 3 times a year minimum, to where you can meet them face to face, maybe grab a cup of coffee with them, just sit down in their office for a little bit, give them an update on the equipment, the operations, the capabilities of the system. Just keep yourself face to face in front of them on a regular basis. Okay? And again, anytime the hospital is going to be conducting any type of drill or training, it would be expected that you and your team would be involved in the planning of that event. Any type of communications when they talk about maybe a revision of their emergency operations plan for that facility, we would expect you to be involved in that. Also, each hospital is probably and more than likely involved in the Georgia Hospital Network coalition system, they should also be involving you in that operation. For example, every region has a coordinating meeting where they meet on a regular basis. Their coalition will have regular meetings. Now, sometimes they're once every quarter, sometimes they're every other month. Depends on the region. But there should be at least one operator on your team active in the regional coalition and attending those scheduled meetings. If you don't know about these meetings, if you're not already involved in that, then I would recommend that you contact your local hospital emergency manager to determine how do you get on that email list so that you would be notified when those meetings are planned or scheduled to attend. Okay, dress code. You may be wondering, why do we have to worry about a dress code? Well, because as an emergency communicator, you are going to be interacting with hospital staff, and you're going to be meeting with different people in management, maybe the CEO or other professional level people. Typically, in an emergency situation, the highest levels of management are going to be involved, and they are going to expect to be interacting with a professional. They look at us as professionals when we're there. And if they do not see you as a professional, I will assure you, they will not want you there. So it's important that we present ourselves as the professionals that we are. Remember, we said earlier that once you step on hospital property, you are under the direction of that hospital incident command. And in a professional environment, peers are expected to act and conduct themselves in a professional manner at all times. That includes exhibiting a professional appearance. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, basically it means don't show up to the hospital with greasy cutoffs or dirty clothing or wrinkled clothing or anything like that. Shorts are only acceptable for medical issues. For example, if you have prosthetics or if there are circumstances where you're operating in a sauna, then yeah, I get it. That makes sense. But most of the time, we would expect you to wear either pants or slacks, like khaki style pants, or blue jeans are acceptable as long as they're not frayed, faded, or torn. Don't wear jeans that have holes in them, okay? Shirts, blouses should not contain text. In other words, advertising, the latest rock concert you went to, your favorite country band, or worse than that, it's something that makes a political statement. It's important that if you want to wear a shirt that either like an Aries shirt, or an ARRL shirt, or maybe if your local club has a shirt that y'all have with the local county amateur radio group logo on it, absolutely fine. That's great. But make sure that it's neat and clean when you show up at the hospital. Some of the hospitals actually have shirts that have the hospital logo on them. And you can even talk to your local emergency manager and say, hey, is there a way we could get shirts for our hospital operators so that we would look like part of this hospital team? Many of them can accommodate that for you. All right, take a break here. Steve, do you have anything pop up on chat yet?
I'm looking. Since there has been such a varied response from hospital personnel around the state, what is being done to educate them about ARES availability and how we might be used?
Well, that's a good question, because each hospital would be the determining factor there. Your local hospital that you serve is the determining factor. How would you be used? What we're covering here is understanding of what our role as emergency communications teams how we would fit into that bigger picture. The circumstances are that most hospitals really don't think that they would ever need amateur radio operators. Most of them don't. And when you talk to emergency operators, emergency managers at your hospital, they're going to tell you, well, hey guys, we have this wonderful thing now called a cell phone. And this is an amazing piece of technology. I can talk to hospitals around the state. I can talk to GMA. I can talk to all my employees. I can do everything here. But many of them do not recognize that this little piece of equipment here has a major, major dependency. It needs a cell signal or an internet Wi-Fi signal, or both. And if those drop off, if those services cease to exist, this becomes a very expensive paperweight. Not only that, as many of you know, in the last 15, 20 years, many of our considered traditional telephone systems, our landlines in our hospital, have moved over to the voice over IP system. What that means is they're not working off of copper wire like they used to. They work over the internet. And again, if the internet goes down and they lose internet communications at that facility, guess what? Their phones are dead. Their phones are useless. They don't think about that. Also, if other services go down, if they lose primary communications through landline, cell phone, and internet, I will assure you every single hospital in the state is going to struggle to communicate. And many of them say, well, we already have a backup. For example, we have a sat phone. And with this sat phone, we're good to go. We can talk anywhere in the world. But more than likely, they have not tested that in a real life situation. For example, I will assure you that if you have a hurricane coming in and you've got solid cloud cover, that satellite phone isn't going to get a signal. Not going to work. And in the midst of an emergency, many of these hospitals will say, oh my, what do we do now? They don't have a plan. They don't have a contingency. That's where we fit in. That's where we step in and can help them, because that's the bottom line. We hope we're never needed, but in the event, I guarantee you, they're going to be tickled to death to have it. And that's the key. So again, there have been situations in this state where we have had real emergencies coming through. And Steve and I have lived through these circumstances where, all right, Steve. Steve and I have had situations where a hospital decided that they did not need their ARES operators. Steve, you're going to have to silence that thing. Thank you. We've had situations where there have been hospitals in emergencies that did not deploy their communications, their ARES communicators, their hospital operators. And then in one particular case, that hospital lost primary power. They lost power to the hospital.
They lost secondary power too.
They lost secondary power. Their backup generators did not come on. All right, please silence your phone. And then when that happened, they had failed to activate their ARES communicators. They had failed to operate their communication team. That hospital was in a dangerous situation. They lost primary power, they lost internet, they lost commercial power, they lost everything. Long story short, that emergency manager lost their job because they had an arrogant sense of confidence that we really don't need those Aries guys. Well, guess what? That turned it out to be a major career failure for one particular emergency manager. Most of the emergency managers may have a genuine understanding of what we do, but a lot of them won't. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the point is, remember, it's all operating from the local hospital tenure. That's where we define ourselves from. That is our local served agency that we serve. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this. We're again under the idea that we are in an activation. You've been called to that facility. You are on station in your area of operation. What do you do? All right. First thing that you will do is you will establish and you will maintain an HF liaison with the Aries Emergency Net or the hospital emergency net on each shift at all times. And what this means is you will be listening. There will be net controls set up in a statewide emergency. We will be communicating this as long as we have cell phone service or text and email. A lot of this information will be made available to you. There will be emails that will go out to all operators saying, get ready, get prepared. If in the event we send out a Everbridge notification, in that notification, we will advise you what frequencies or what communications facilities to monitor. We may say, guys, stand by, monitor D-Star, 30 Bravo. That may be what we send out. We may say also, in addition, there will be an HF net on 3975. When you get set up in your facility, contact, make communication into that net. Let them know you're there. Check in. That way, the net manager will have a record that you are on station, you are deployed, you are activated. And you must stay in communication with them. Not talking, but listening. Any information will be transmitted, through either the HF net or through D-Star net. That will be conducted simultaneously. Okay? If there is a need to pull away from that, then you will be expected to communicate with the net control and advise them that you will be away from your radio for a set period of time. Give them an estimation of the time you will be away. Let's say, for example, the hospital says, okay, we're going to be having a meeting. It'll be about a 30-minute meeting. We're going to be meeting in our emergency operations center. We need you there. It's going to start in 5 minutes. You would contact the net control and advise them that this station, your hospital, will be offline for 30 minutes. Estimated 30 minutes. You will report back in once back on station. Go to your meeting. You will come back, check back into the net, let the net know, okay, our station is active at this time. We're back on channel. If there's more than one person, you don't really have to do that. Designate one of you to go attend that meeting while the other person stays on that net. That way you will be available if any emergency traffic comes our way. And that could be emergency traffic from National Weather Service. It could be emergency traffic from GEMA. It could be emergency traffic coming from Department of Public Health. You need to be available because if you're not on station, if you're not monitoring the frequency, you may not know it. You may not hear it. And if that's the case, we failed in our primary job, which is to be available to receive traffic and to relay that traffic. Okay? Again, how you define your work shifts when deployed will be up to you. However, you're going to need to let that emergency hospital, emergency operations center kind of know what your shifts are. And let them know that someone is going to be there because they're going to be the ones to activate you. You cannot just shut down and go home until they deactivate. So you are there serving at their pleasure. So that's who you report to. So if that hospital, usually when you have your primary briefing, they're going to say, guys, we expect an activation for the next 12 hours. Okay. And they would be monitoring that. If the conditions worsen or if the circumstances allow it to continue, they may call you and say, okay, we've decided to extend operations for another 12 hours. Okay, if you've been there 12 hours, you're going to be exhausted. You can't manage another additional 12 hours. You're going to need a secondary shift. So be aware, it may not be your best operators that are available. For some of you, there's only 1 or 2 people that work that facility. Don't have 2 people there for that first 12-hour shift and then find out, oops, we now have to extend for a second 12-hour shift and we're both here and we're both exhausted. So be aware of that. If you're there for the first 12 hours, both of you are there, one of you needs to be finding a quiet place where you can get some rest. Just be aware of that. Keep your resources handy. Always prepare that every event is going to be extended beyond what people tell you. Always anticipate the worst. Always expect that, you know what, this could get really bad. We need to take those precautions ahead of time. We need to prepare to extend our deployment if necessary. All right. Also, you need to make sure you're self-sufficient. Now, again, some of this information is not going to apply if you are activated in a hospital itself, because in an activation, if you are deployed by the hospital, that hospital will feed you. They will provide you with sustenance. They'll give you food, water, coffee. It'll be available for you, and you will not have a problem. You don't have to bring your own food into the facility. These are things, again, that it's good to have a clarification and understanding long before you're ever activated. Okay? If you have members with disabilities that prevent them from physically deploying in an activation, remember, they can serve a vital role for you, serving maybe at home, to act as a relay station for you, or an alternate net control station, or even a digital relay station as required. Utilize your team if they cannot deploy for any particular reason. Maybe they have a family member who they can't leave. That's okay, guys. Just remember, they can serve a valuable role. You may have a situation at your hospital where for some reason you're not getting out. Well, guess what? You can relay to them and they can get out for you. You can relay those messages. Many hospitals, we have hospitals in the state that actually have their system set up off-site. They're actually in a building or a house across the street from a hospital. That's their area of operation. But you may need to have an operator in the hospital EOC who can then relay information to your area of operation so that you can conduct this communications. Be aware of that there's many different ways you can make this thing work. Okay. Now, initially, there are going to be times when there's just a potential for severe weather. Like we said, we have a tropical storm currently in the Gulf or heading toward the Gulf right now. All of us are expected to kind of go into our own dedicated standby mode. Be aware of what's going on. Be aware of ways that you can monitor what's happening through hurricane watches, checking with the Weather Service, National Weather Service, HURAVAC. There are many, many ways that you can be aware of what's happening so that you know what's happening in your area or potential to happen in your area. It's typically the duty of the emergency coordinator and AECs in each county to keep their membership informed of these instances. The main reason is just so that everybody hears the official bottom statement. Members, When you're informed that such a watch or warning has been issued, take the time to prepare yourself by securing some cash. You should have $100 minimum in small bills. Now, Steve has secured a plan for those of you that don't have $100 available in small bills. Steve has coordinated with a support person in the hospital team that can handle that for you. And Steve, can you remind, what is her name? Was it Helen?
Oh, Helen Waite.
Yes. So any of you, if you do not have $100, Steve recommends that you go to Helen Waite. Okay. All right. Moving on from that, also make sure you have gas in your vehicle so that you're ready to go at any given time. Make sure you have a bag with some change of clothes, any particular medications that you need. Put them in a bag. Have a few of them ready to go so that you're not having to scramble when you're deployed. Because when you're deployed, you should be able to say, I'm on my way. Or you don't want to say, look, it's going to take me a few hours to kind of get all my stuff together. That's not what you need. You need to be ready to go. All right. Again, do not deploy on your own unless you are specifically requested by the local hospital EM. All right. So guys, as you can see, there's not one plan that we can define that would apply or cover every possible scenario that could occur. That's why it's important that we kind of be as prepared as possible to meet any contingency. The need for resources by each hospital is going to be determined by that hospital based upon their specific situation. Things that you cannot control is illness, personal illness, or any family medical illnesses, or anything that can affect your availability. That's why it's important that we work as a team, and why we have and encourage more than one operator at every hospital. Because guys, you have no way of knowing are we all going to be available, and you have to think about those contingencies. All right, Steve, do we have any messages come up or questions so far?
Yeah, we've had a couple of them. When I think about the frailty of the internet in disaster, I wonder about the wisdom of relying on DSTAR for EMCOM.
Very good point. Very good point. When we talk about our modes of communication, you will notice that DSTAR is not our primary. DSTAR is a secondary, or what we consider tertiary. It's not our primary, because you're right. DSTAR has a huge dependency upon the internet. When the internet's down, whether it be regional or statewide, it's basically nothing but a local repeater. Or if you don't have a local DSTAR repeater, it's dead. You don't have much of an option. So that's why HF is considered our primary communication tool. For a regional hospital, if you're in a regional hospital that communicates and reports to your RCH, your coordinating hospital, that's why we advise you have to have the ability to communicate to them via simplex without dependency upon either a local repeater or the internet. That's why we talk about needing emergency power availability. So you're not dependent upon commercial power at that facility to run your equipment, having a battery backup, or being on an emergency generator system at the hospital. So yeah, but I'll tell you this, we have had hurricanes come through and they never lost DSTAR, or they never lost internet. So there are times, and our philosophy is it's just a tool in the toolbox. It works great. If DSTAR is working, or for that matter, if your cell system still works, your cell phone's still operational, by all means, use your cell phone if you need to. Doesn't hurt. If you're trying to send WinLink messages at the facility and you've got internet, by all means, I have no problem. Use Telnet. Just use Telnet. If it works, great. We train not using Telnet because we train under the assumption that you're not going to have internet. And if you don't know how to do it and you don't make it work, then you're going to be in a world of hurt if you're dependent upon Telnet or you're dependent upon D-Star as your primary communications tool. All right. Why don't we have, I'm looking at this, Steve. Okay, why don't we have regional HF frequencies so we don't interfere with other regions? There's no reason why you can't have different regional HF frequencies, but I will tell you there's one primary reason why that typically doesn't happen. Because if you've ever been on and spent much time on HF, especially during a critical situation in the state, usually it's not just affecting your state, but it's affecting other states as well. But you're going to find that there are very few free HF frequencies in there. You may be saying, okay, we're going to pick this frequency as our regional HF frequency. And the time you go out to use it, guess what? They're having a rag chew. Some state group is having a rag chew. And you're like, well, guys, we're using this frequency. We need this frequency for emergency. I'm going to tell you, more than likely, they're going to tell you, hey, we were here first. We don't care. Find another frequency. And then you're scrambling to try to find something. That's why, again, not people, even if they're in an emergency, ham radio operators are not going to be oftentimes willing to say, hey guys, we got it. Y'all are in an emergency. We'll back off. We'll move to another frequency. You wish it worked that way, but not anymore. It doesn't. You will notice many times when we have our emergency nets on drills on first Sunday of the month, you're going to find many times, guess what? We have somebody just adjacent to us or just like a couple of kilohertz off that is bleeding over. And it makes it extremely difficult to conduct our meetings. That's why we have multiple frequencies that we can move to if we need to. No one owns or controls the frequency. So just because you designate a frequency doesn't mean it's going to be available to you at any given time. But again, the other reason why we don't set up regional frequencies is because you can only listen to one frequency at a time. Unless you have a multi-$1,000 receiver that can monitor two frequencies simultaneously. That's why we operate off of one primary frequency at all times. If we need to have any type of tactical or even logistical communications on a different frequency, we have those frequencies available to us, but we have to get permission and leave the primary frequency to go conduct our traffic and then come back. So, okay. All right. Let's see here. Someone posted here the Aries Field Deployment Go Kit checklist. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but I will say this. We will have time at the end of our presentation to kind of take questions. So I'm going to move on from here. Okay. Let's see, moving on to the next slide here. Slide is not moving. Bear with me, guys. There we go. All right. In any activation planning, there's also going to be deactivation planning. That is something you need to be considering at any time that you're deployed. There will need to be a deactivation plan. And Aries team leadership is usually involved in all planning aspects pertaining to that activation and use deactivation and the deactivation of the team. So when you are deployed, your deactivation plan needs to be in place. i.e. verifying that all your documentation has taken place, that you have your primary documents, your 214s, your 309s, all 213s sent and received. Those need to be kept on file at your facility. You need to make a report. Typically, we call it the after action report. You need to be able to have a report that you could put together of every activity, everything that you were involved in during your activation, every team member that was involved, critical documents that were sent and received, all 213, 309, 214, all of these need to be made available in your after action report to your activating facility, to you, whoever you would report to. In most hospitals, it's going to be your emergency manager. They need to get a copy of that after action report. Also, typically, your local county EC is going to want a copy of that after action report too, anytime that the team is active. Okay, continued emergency operations training. The ARES team should always be looking for ways to train. It's the only way that we can improve our capability and preparation. So again, Steve and I are going to be looking at ways that we can continue our training as we go on. As a matter of fact, following this training session at 10:30 is going to be a WinLink training. And that's going to be conducted by Larry Whitehead, 84NX, and Mark Bell. They'll be conducting a co-training on that as well. So again, after this one, there's the follow-up WinLink training. From time to time, Steve and I will send out notifications that we've put together additional training. As things come up, we'll be producing those for you. All right. And also, anytime that there is a drill or exercise, we would expect you to be involved. And again, it may be your hospital putting on a drill, because remember, each hospital is required to conduct trainings on a regular basis. And if you're not aware of them, then you need to be in communication with your emergency managers at your facility to make sure that you're included in those trainings. And I will be honest with you, though, you may say, well, you know, I haven't heard about our hospital doing anything in the last year. Well, more than likely it's because, guess what? When COVID hit, all trainings went out the window because they went into COVID mode. And many of them are still in COVID mode. And this has thrown all trainings off. So consequently, keep in mind that don't pressure them under this time, because they may tell you, look, training is the last thing we have time for right now. We are trying to survive. We're at capacity right now. We're at lockdown, and half of our staff is out because they've been exposed to COVID. And we're operating on spare staff, and many of them are stressed out to the max. So be respectful of what they're dealing with right now. Now's not the time to be pushing agendas. We need to work with them and let them know we are there to support them. Okay. We talk about utilization a lot. Many of you recognize that we all understand that amateur emergency service is the last line of communication. And so when we talk about this, it's important to understand that in a hospital communication system, we predominantly recognize that we use both tactical and logistical messaging systems. For example, most of our tactical traffic we would handle via HF, D-Star, or local repeaters, or by simplex VHF, all voice. We pass most traffic via voice. However, in a hospital situation, if information is protected, if it involves critical confidential information, then this information typically is not for everybody's eyes. For example, it may have HIPAA protected information in it. You recognize that that's why we choose WinLink or RMS Express as a means of communicating that information digitally. Or if it's a large amount of information, if it's a list of documents, you don't want to necessarily be transmitting that over open frequency. Not a good idea. It's not professional. So be aware, that's why WinLink capabilities are critical. So just recognize that if you're confused about how you can send WinLink communications traffic from your hospital, then let us know, and or better yet, stay informed for the next session where we talk about continued WinLink training. Okay, we talk about supported agencies. When we talk about the Georgia Hospital Team, which is who we are, and again, our role is we support the majority of hospitals throughout the state of Georgia. We're not in every hospital, but we're working for it. But as we grow, every year we keep adding more hospitals that come online. But when we think about who do we primarily support? Well, the answer is we support Georgia hospitals. That is our primary concern. In addition to that, there are many long-term care facilities that are also bound by guidelines that require them to have emergency communications in place. In addition to that, could be assisted living facilities or nursing homes. Many of you have amateur radio equipment in some of your assisted living facilities or long-term care facilities. And also included under this and would be hospice agencies. They as well are also required to have emergency communications capabilities. Do they have it? Many of them don't. And many of them just either because of finances or logistical reasons or organizations have just never gotten around to it. Just be aware of it. We can be asked to support them. And that's what we try to do, guys. We try to support whoever we can. But just so you recognize, our primary responsibility are to the hospitals. Okay. Secondary supported agencies would be GEMA, Department of Public Health, or the Georgia Hospital Association. These are our teammates. These are the people, the players that we work with. This is who we're going to primarily be expected to provide communications for. Okay. Now, again, our primary mission is to support hospital emergency communications. The types of communications assets that we will use will be based on whatever's available at the time of the request. All right, communications modes. Our primary communications modes for tactical communications will be by voice communication over HFD star simplex frequency or even your local repeater. Primary communication mode for logistical communication traffic from point to point, usually it's going to be via WinLink. And using a WinLink gateway that you can hit, or ideally P2P, peer-to-peer. If you've not trained at communicating from one facility to another via peer-to-peer, now's a great time to be training. Try that out, see how well it works. We have used this in the past and it has worked extremely well. It's a great way to communicate with just another hospital and you're not having to rely upon a WinLink gateway. If you're in an area where you've got a really good WinLink packet network of gateways, that's great. You have multiple opportunities. Otherwise, you're reliant upon HF. There is at least one hospital in the state I'm aware of that has PACTOR capability. That gives that hospital a much greater capability of hitting a gateway, because PACTOR, they can be talking to stations thousands of miles away. Whereas with HF, we're limited within 300 to 500 miles. If you don't have that capability, typically you can hit a gateway here in the state of Georgia. We have many, many HF WinLink gateways available for use. And I will tell you this, that we have yet to find that we couldn't hit at least one station in the state of Georgia. And we have new gateways coming up. I will tell you, Larry Whited, AB4NX, has got an excellent gateway set up. And if you haven't tried to hit it, it works extremely well. So keep aware that I can tell you here in Fannin County, we have 2 WinLink gateways operational 24/7, and they work great. So be aware, just know which gateways tend to be reliable that you can hit, and know that what your capabilities are. Assuming everything went down in the state of Georgia, make sure you can hit gateways in other states. Okay, we talk about communicating via WinLink, and we talk about using the ICS 213 standard message. Now, there have been times that when we've done our tests on our monthly hospital net, people have sent me the HICS 213, which is the designated hospital incident command system 213. It's a different document. And people have asked this question many times. Why don't we use the hospital 213? And the answer is, you will be expected to use whatever your local hospital wants you to use. But I will assure you, almost all hospitals are going to be using the standard ICS 213. Now, they may choose to use the HICS. If it is, not a problem. You download the HICS blank form, you communicate that, and that's what you send. We have the ability to send whatever the hospital wants us to send. They may want you to just send a standard message. Doesn't have to be a 213. If that's the case, fine. You can do it that way, or go ahead and just put it on a 213. They just say, hey, need you to send this message to this hospital, and it may not be on a standard 213. You can put it on a 213. Doesn't matter. Use whatever the hospital wants you to use. But I will tell you yes, go ahead, Steve.
Got one question. It's in this vein. Regarding protected information, as amateurs, we are prohibited from transmitting encrypted messages. How is it that truly protected WinLink? How is it that truly protected WinLink transmissions are legal for amateur radio?
Well, they have been accepted, and it has been challenged, but to my knowledge, it has not been deemed as encrypted. And as far as I'm aware, until that changes and we get notification from ARRL or the FCC that WinLink transmissions of information is not advisable or allowed, we're going to continue to use it. So I can't answer all those questions. That might be a great question in the next training session to bring up during the WinLink training, because I do know there has been ongoing discussion about that. But at this point right now, I will say that every day across the United States, there have been hospitals, government agencies, EOCs utilizing the standard, sending ICS 213 and other documents via WinLink without any problem.
The thing is that there is a free software available that can, in essence, monitor that. Very few people take the time to implement that, but it can be monitored, and I'm sure the FCC has the ability to do that.
Good
I'd like
point.
to weigh in, Brad, on that one. We, as SizeOps, we have access to every word that passes through our gateways. We can review all traffic. It's wide open, so there is nothing secret about it. As a matter of fact, it's in part of the any file, the gateway itself, so you can read this traffic. So it's just less available to people to read casually, but it is by no means encrypted. It's an acceptable method of doing things.
Well, the other point on that same thing, Larry, is the fact that when we're transmitting these WinLink messages, we are not transmitting privileged information.
Yes.
In other words, you can designate patient one, but they're not going to know who or what patient one is.
Right. And that's a whole nother subject, HIPAA.
Yeah. Okay, don't want to get bogged down on this, but thank you, Larry. Thank you, Stan, and Steve. Again, it's a good question because it's something we all need to be aware of. We don't want to be doing something that would be deemed illegal. And I will assure you that if that law changes, we will be bringing it to everyone's attention. We will be working on whatever the plan is to deem otherwise. Okay, in addition to the 213, all traffic will and must be logged, regardless if it's digital or voice. That's why we use the ICS 309. The 309 is not the only way it can be logged, but it is a great way to do that. Many of people will use the 214 and just use their 214 for that. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But the important thing is you need to log it because, guys, if it's not logged, it didn't happen. And that's just the bottom way you have to look at it. You can't prove it happened, and there's no way you could ever prove it happened unless it's logged. It's important on a 309 because it puts a timestamp for every communication. Somebody may come back later and say, hey, what time did you send this message? You can refer back to a 309 and get the answer right there. It's important to understand that. Also, here's the other thing that's important. If you work with multiple laptops or computers, let's say you don't have a dedicated computer at your facility and you rely upon your own personal laptop, and you come in and you work a shift and then you leave and you have to go home, and somebody comes in to relieve you and they're bringing their laptop now. Well, guess what? You need to be working off of a common document, maybe a handwritten document that you can have there so that you're not taking critical information home that was on your laptop. And just be aware, keeping hard copy forms of these standard forms that we use, having them available, already copied, ready to go, and having them at your fingertips at your facility would be incredibly important. Okay. Content of all messages sent or received are considered confidential and not to be revealed to anyone other than the sending and receiving party. Care should be taken to utilize the current ICS forms as available. For example, we find this, you log into WinLink, many people have saved the ICS 213 as one of their favorite forms. Great, it's a great convenience. Just click on your favorite form and you go. What most people don't realize is that you notice sometimes you log into WinLink and they're saying, oh, there have been forms that have been updated. Do you want to, we're going to go through the updating of the form. Great. Now we have updated forms. But if you saved the form as your favorite, it did not update. It's going to send the old form, the one that you saved as a favorite. And when that happens, guess what? You send it, it doesn't come across. This happens every month. I get WinLink messages and I'm like, your 213 didn't come across because you're using the old form. So guys, I recommend don't save it as your favorite form. Just go into templates, USA Forms, ICS 213, grab it and just pull, because that's going to always pull the latest, greatest updated form. And that'll work. Okay. Health and welfare traffic, which comes up from time to time, is usually going to be referred to either the nearest national transportation net or the Saturn net if it's available. In an emergency, when you are deployed, you're really not going to be able to handle health or wellness traffic. You may be asked to do that, and you may have to defer from that. That is not our primary task. We are there to support just the served agency that we represent. Okay? If circumstances are such that you're down, it's quiet, there's really nothing going on, if that case, you want to take that on and handle that, by all means, that's fine. Just recognize that's not your priority. It has to be a secondary. If the emergency situation involves a hurricane watch or a warning, assets may be assigned to monitor and report to the hurricane watch net. But again, that's not your primary responsibility. If you have the ability and you're in an affected area and you have the freedom to do that, by all means, you can be involved in whatever you feel you can handle. Okay? The Georgia ARES net is going to operate as long as needed during the local emergency. Again, primary frequency 3975. It'll be used for statewide as well as local regional repeaters as long as that repeater is available. The net will be used for command and control of incoming and outgoing assets, and primarily though, for information. The purpose of that net is to keep everyone aware of what's going on at the same time. But many times during the day, you're going to realize 3975 is going to be deader than a doornail. That's why they will refer to the secondary HF frequency, 7287.5. Most of you already have this saved in a memory on your HF radios. I recommend if you do, go ahead and label them as the ARES primary, ARES secondary frequency. Just be aware though that at any given time, the section manager or the section emergency coordinator or the net manager can call a different frequency because you never know. They get on to run a net and somebody's already on that frequency. And at that point, they may choose to move the frequency. So be aware of that. The likelihood of that happening, that both frequencies would be utilized at the same time, would be highly unlikely, but it could be the case. And if that is the case, usually that would be communicated through something like the D-Star network. They may be transmitting on the D-Star 30 Bravo saying, look, guys, they've moved the primary frequency from 3975 to, 3968, simply because the frequency was in use. And they would be alerting people. That's why it's nice to have the ability to monitor both nets, the D-Star net as well as the HF net. All right, all nets operating under emergency conditions are directed nets. All traffic should flow through net control at all times. And then lastly, I wanted to share tactical call signs. And I want to make a point about tactical call signs because many of you in your facilities or some EOCs will have a tactical call sign related to the nature and location of their assignment. At the time of deployment, you may define a tactical call sign for your location. It's important that everyone understand what that tactical call sign is, and when you are net control or when you change staffing or change shift, it's important that you notify the net control when one person is leaving and another person's coming on. So there's going to be a lot more talk about tactical call signs and even how you can use tactical call signs for your facility if you do not already have a dedicated club call sign for your facility. And many of you don't have that. But we will be talking about utilization of a tactical call sign for facilities in the next presentation. Okay, guys, we are at the point here. We are literally out of time, but we have
Brett.
covered everything. Yes, Steve.
I need to jump in here for 2 quick comments. One, I still have people that haven't let me know they're in here and all they have is a first name. Doesn't do me any good. I at least need a call sign. I can track you down that way. The second one is the second session will follow this one in just a very short time. And somebody had a question about, where did it go? Evacuations on Southeast Georgia. Let's see if I can find it. And the answer is yes, everybody evacuates, kind of. Here in Chatham County, unless it's going to be a Cat 4 or better, our EOC stands operational and our hospitals do. They will evacuate the hospital as best they can, but they cannot evacuate everybody. Some are too critical to be able to evacuate, so we still furnish communications for operators that are willing to stay, take their families out and come back.
Very good. All right, guys, we are out of time. I wish we had more time. We could have talked about our Appendix C, but all of you should have this information. And just be aware that how we operate, communicate. If you have any further questions about the presentation today, please contact either myself or Steve Jonas. We'll be more than happy to work with you. Send us an email, and we will be glad to help you with that. All right, guys, I'm going to conclude this session and start the next one. So everyone have a great day. Thank you for being here today.